close your eyes for a moment. Actually, don't. Keep reading. But consider what would happen if you did close your eyes right now. The screen would disappear. The words would vanish. The room around you would go dark. And yet, something would remain. You would remain. That sense of being here, of existing, of experiencing the darkness behind your eyelids. That ineffable feeling of being you, looking out at the world from behind your eyes. That thing that philosophers call consciousness and scientists struggle to explain. Open your eyes again and notice something strange. The world floods back in. Colors, shapes, meaning, language, all of it rushing into your awareness like water filling a vessel. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. Where does that experience come from? Not the light entering your eyes, not the neurons firing in your brain. Those are just physics and chemistry. The question is deeper. Why does it feel like anything at all to be you? Why aren't you just a biological machine processing information in the dark? With no inner experience, no awareness, no sense of what it's like to exist? Richard Feynman spent his life asking questions that nobody else thought to ask. He looked at the world with a kind of relentless curiosity that cut through assumptions like a laser through fog. He won the Nobel Prize for figuring out how light and matter interact at the quantum level. He cracked open the mystery of superfluidity. He showed the world why the Challenger space shuttle exploded, and he did it with a glass of ice water and a rubber O-ring on live television. But there was one question that haunted him, one mystery he returned to again and again in private conversations, in scattered lectures, in margins of notebooks that only surfaced years after his death. The question of consciousness. The question of why it feels like something to be alive. Most people don't know this about Feynman. They know the bongo drums, and the safe cracking, and the irreverent humor. They know the famous lectures on physics that made him a legend. But they don't know about the late nights at Caltech when he would corner colleagues and push them on the mind-body problem. They don't know about the fragments of thought he left behind, ideas so radical and so carefully reasoned that they've been quietly ignored by the mainstream scientific establishment for decades. What I'm going to share with you today comes from those fragments, from lectures that were never officially published, from conversations reconstructed by those who were there, from the implications of his own work that Feynman himself drew out but never fully articulated in public. And I need to warn you, what you're about to hear will fundamentally change how you think about yourself, about reality, and about the nature of mind itself. Let me start with a simple observation. You are made of atoms, roughly 7 octillion of them, give or take. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, a smattering of other elements arranged in elaborate patterns. The same atoms that make up rocks and water and distant stars. There's nothing special about your atoms. Those atoms would eventually scatter and become part of other things. How is that possible? How does a collection of unconscious particles give rise to conscious experience? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Not the easy problems, like explaining how the brain processes visual information, or stores memories, or generates behavior. Those are hard too, but they're hard in a familiar way. We can imagine, at least in principle, building a machine that does all those things. The hard problem is different. The hard problem asks why there's experience at all. Why isn't everything just happening in the dark? Why does the information processing come with a felt quality, a sense of what it's like to be you rather than someone else, or nothing at all? Feynman understood this problem better than most physicists of his generation, because he understood, better than most, the limits of physical explanation. Let me show you what I mean. In one of his lesser-known lectures, given not at Caltech, but at a small conference in upstate New York in 1973, Feynman posed a thought experiment that cuts right to the heart of the matter. Imagine, he said, that we have a complete physical theory of the brain. Not just the rough outline we have now, but every single detail. We know every neuron, every synapse, every chemical gradient, every electrical pattern. We can predict with perfect accuracy how any brain will respond to any stimulus. We can explain every behavior, every thought, every decision in purely physical terms. Would we have explained consciousness? Most scientists would say yes. Of course we would. What else is there? But Feynman pushed back. He said something that surprised everyone in the room. He said, imagine we built a perfect simulation of your brain in a computer. Every atom, every interaction perfectly replicated. The simulation would behave exactly like you. It would claim to be conscious. It would insist that it has inner experiences. It would write poetry about the beauty of sunsets and fall in love and fear death. But here's the question. Would there be anybody home? Would there be an inner experience accompanying all that information processing? Or would it be, as philosophers say, a zombie? Something that acts conscious but has no inner life whatsoever? And here's the part that made people uncomfortable. Feynman said, we have no way to answer that question. Not because we haven't done enough science, but because the question itself lies outside the domain of physical explanation. Physics tells us about the behavior of systems. It tells us about matter and energy and forces and fields. It tells us about correlations and patterns and predictions. What it doesn't tell us, what it can't tell us, is why any of that should be accompanied by experience. The experience is extra. It's something we know from the inside, from being conscious ourselves. But it's not something that appears anywhere in our equations. Now, let me be careful here. Feynman was not a mystic. He had no patience for woolly thinking or new age hand-waving. He was unclaiming that consciousness was magic, or that it violated physical laws, or that it required some supernatural explanation. He was making a much more subtle point. He was saying that our current framework for understanding reality might be incomplete. Not wrong, but incomplete. And that something might be consciousness itself. To understand what Feynman was driving at, you need to understand something about the history of science. For the last 400 years, physics has operated on a basic assumption. The assumption that you can understand the world from the outside, that you can describe reality in objective third-person terms without reference to any particular observer. This worked brilliantly for most of physics. It gave us Newton's laws and Maxwell's equations and Einstein's relativity. It let us send rockets to the moon and build computers and split the atom. But then came quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics threw a wrench into the whole enterprise. Here's the problem. In quantum mechanics, the act of observation seems to play a fundamental role. Before you measure a particle, it exists in a superposition of states, spread out across multiple possibilities. When you measure it, the superposition collapses into a definite outcome. But what counts as a measurement? What counts as an observation? This is the infamous measurement problem, and it has haunted physics for a century. Some physicists try to avoid the question by focusing on practical calculations. Others invoke multiple universes, or hidden variables, or elaborate philosophical maneuvers. But the problem never really goes away, and Feynman knew it. In private conversations, Feynman would sometimes say things that never made it into his public lectures. Things that revealed how deeply he had thought about these issues. One colleague, who spoke with him extensively in the last years of his life, reported that Feynman once said something extraordinary. He said that the measurement problem might not be a problem about physics at all. It might be a problem about consciousness. Because a measurement is, in the end, something that enters into someone's awareness. It's an experience, a perception, a conscious event. And if consciousness is outside our physical framework, then of course we can't explain measurement in purely physical terms. We're trying to explain something that involves consciousness without having any theory of consciousness to work with. It's like trying to explain water without knowing about molecules. You can describe the surface patterns, but you're missing the fundamental structure. Now, this raises an obvious question. If consciousness is fundamental, if it's not something that emerges from physics, but something that needs to be included in physics from the start, what does that mean for our understanding of reality? This is where Feynman's thinking gets really interesting and really controversial, because he seemed to be suggesting, at least in these private moments, that we might need to rethink the basic ontology of the universe, the basic stuff that reality is made of. Let me give you an analogy that Feynman himself used. Think about space and time. For Newton, space and time were absolute. They were the stage on which physics happened, but they weren't themselves part of the physics. Then Einstein came along and showed that space and time are dynamic. They curve and stretch and warp in response to matter and energy. They're not the stage. They're part of the performance. This was a fundamental revision of our understanding. Not just a new theory, but a new ontology. A new picture of what the world is made of. Feynman hinted that something similar might need to happen with consciousness. Right now, we treat consciousness as epiphenomenal, as something that appears when you have enough neurons firing in the right pattern, as something that emerges from physical processes, but isn't itself fundamental. But what if that's wrong? What if consciousness is more like space and time in Einstein's physics? Not emergent, but fundamental. Not produced by matter, but woven into the fabric of reality from the very beginning. This idea has a name. Philosophers call it panpsychism. The view that consciousness is a basic feature of the universe, present to some degree in all physical systems. Now, before you dismiss this as crazy, let me point out something important. Feynman never explicitly endorsed panpsychism. He was too careful a thinker for that. But he did say that we should take it seriously as a possibility, that we shouldn't rule it out just because it sounds strange. After all, quantum mechanics sounds strange. Relativity sounds strange. The history of physics is a history of discovering that reality is far weirder than our intuitions suggest. And here's where it gets personal. Here's where it stops being abstract philosophy and starts being about you. If consciousness is fundamental, if it's built into the structure of reality, then you are not an accident. You are not a biological machine that happens to have developed the illusion of inner experience. You are a manifestation of something deep and real and irreducible. Your awareness is not a side effect. It's not an evolutionary trick. It's not something that could, in principle, be eliminated while leaving everything else the same. Your consciousness is part of what the universe is. Think about what that means. Think about the implications for how you understand your own existence. Right now, you're having an experience. The experience of reading these words, of considering these ideas, of feeling whatever you're feeling as you take this in. That experience is not just happening in your head. It's not just neurons firing in patterns. It's the universe experiencing itself through you. You are a window through which reality looks at itself. And that window is not optional. It's not an add-on. It's essential to what you are. But let me push this further. Because Feynman didn't stop at just suggesting consciousness might be fundamental. He also raised a question that almost nobody talks about. The question of time. with time as one of the dimensions, and every moment is equally real. So, where does our experience of time come from? Why do we feel like we're moving through time when physics suggests that all moments exist equally? Feynman connected this back to his earlier work on irreversibility, but with a twist that he rarely articulated publicly. He suggested that the experience of time, the felt sense of flow and becoming, might itself be a clue to the nature of consciousness, because consciousness doesn't just exist in time. It creates time. Or rather, it creates the experience of time. The sense that there is a now, a present moment that is somehow more real than the past or the future. This connects to something called the block universe view in physics. According to this view, the universe is like a loaf of bread. Each slice is a moment in time. All the slices exist equally. There's nothing special about any particular slice. But we don't experience the universe that way. We experience it as if we're moving through the slices. Let me tell you about another piece of this puzzle. Feynman was fascinated by the relationship between mathematics and physical reality. This might seem like a detour, but bear with me. It's actually central to understanding his views on consciousness. In his famous lectures, Feynman often remarked on what he called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. The fact that pure mathematical structures, invented by human minds with no reference to the physical world, turn out again and again to describe that world with uncanny accuracy. Why should that be? Why should the universe be mathematically comprehensible at all? Feynman didn't have a final answer to this question, but he suggested that it might have something to do with consciousness. After all, mathematics exists in minds. It's something that conscious beings do. And if consciousness is fundamental to reality, then maybe the mathematical structure of the universe and the consciousness that perceives it are not separate things. Maybe they're two aspects of the same underlying reality. Maybe the reason we can understand the universe mathematically is because both the mathematics and the universe arise from a common source, a source that includes consciousness as an essential ingredient. This is a staggering idea when you really take it in. It suggests that your ability to understand reality is not a lucky accident. It's not just that evolution happened to give you a brain that can do math. It's that understanding is built into the fabric of things. That the universe is, in some deep sense, made to be understood. That consciousness and cosmos are intimately connected, not as observer and observed, but as two faces of the same reality. Now, let me bring this down to earth for a moment. Let me talk about what all this means for how you live your life. Because it's easy to treat philosophy of mind as abstract speculation, disconnected from everyday existence. But Feynman never thought that way. He always insisted that ideas should make a difference, that they should change how you see things, how you act, how you relate to the world. If consciousness is fundamental, if you are not just a machine, but a manifestation of something essential to reality, it changes everything. It changes how you think about death, for one thing. Because if consciousness is fundamental, it's not clear that it can simply stop. Matter and energy don't stop. They transform. Maybe consciousness is the same. Maybe what you call your individual awareness is a particular pattern in a field that never ends. I'm not claiming to know. Feynman didn't claim to know. But it's a possibility that deserves consideration. It changes how you think about other people, too. If consciousness is fundamental, then every person you meet is not just a complex machine. They're a center of experience, a window through which the universe looks at itself, just like you. The connection you feel with others, the sense of shared humanity, isn't an illusion or a social construct. It's a recognition of something real, of the consciousness that you share, of the fundamental nature of mind that expresses itself through all of us. And it changes how you think about meaning. One of the great anxieties of the modern age is the sense that life is meaningless, that we're just atoms bouncing around in a cold, indifferent universe, and nothing we do matters. But if consciousness is fundamental, the universe is not indifferent. It's aware, not in the sense of a big person in the sky watching you, but in the sense that awareness is woven into its very structure. You are not a meaningless speck. You are how meaning exists. You are how value enters the world. You are how the universe cares about itself. Let me return to Feynman one more time. Near the end of his life, when he was battling the cancer that would eventually take him, Feynman reportedly said something to a close friend. He said that he wasn't afraid of dying, not because he believed in an afterlife. He was too much of a skeptic for that, but because he had come to see that death was just a transformation, that the consciousness he had been would not simply wink out of existence, but would become something else, return to something it had never really left. He didn't elaborate. He didn't explain. But the friend who reported this said that Feynman seemed at peace in a way he had never seen before, as if he had figured something out, as if he had understood something about consciousness and death and the nature of things that most people never grasp. I can't tell you exactly what Feynman understood. I can only share the fragments and hints and implications of his thinking. But here's what I believe he was pointing toward. Consciousness is not a problem to be solved. It's just not something that needs to be explained away or reduced to neural circuits or dismissed as an illusion. It's the most real thing there is. It's what you know most directly, more directly than any scientific theory or philosophical argument. Before you know anything else, you know that you're conscious, that you're experiencing, that there's something it's like to be you. And maybe, just maybe, that's the deepest truth about reality. Not that the universe is made of atoms, though it is. Not that it's governed by mathematical laws, though it seems to be, but that it's shot through with awareness. That consciousness is not separate from matter, but the inside of matter. The felt quality of existence that accompanies the mathematical structure. The experience that makes the equations real. This is speculative. I've said that several times. But it's not arbitrary speculation. It's speculation grounded in the deepest problems of physics and philosophy. Problems that Feynman wrestled with his whole life. Problems that remain unsolved to this day. And the direction he was pointing, the possibility he was exploring, deserves to be taken seriously. Because if he was right, it changes everything. You are not what you thought you were. You are not a biological accident, a temporary arrangement of matter that briefly flickers with awareness before returning to the void. You are consciousness itself, expressing itself through a particular form, for a particular time, in a particular way. Your life is not meaningless. Your experiences are not illusions. Your sense of being here, right now, reading these words and having these thoughts, is the most real and most important thing in the universe. Feynman spent his career showing people that the world is far stranger and more wonderful than they imagined. He showed us that light is both a wave and a particle. That particles can be in many places at once. That antimatter exists and time dilates and space curves, and the quantum world mocks our common sense at every turn. But his deepest insight might have been about consciousness, about the fact that all this strangeness and wonder is known, that there is something it is like to discover these truths, that the universe is not just out there, but also in here, in you, In me, in every conscious being that has ever existed or ever will. That's what Feynman was pointing toward. That's what he glimpsed in those late-night conversations and fragmentary lectures. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. Not a final answer, because there isn't one, but a direction, a possibility, a new way of seeing yourself and your place in the cosmos. The cup falls and breaks. The ink mixes with the water. Time flows forward and never back. And through it all, you are aware. You are experiencing. You are here. That awareness is not separate from the physics. It's not added on top of the physics. It might be what makes the physics real. It might be the deepest feature of existence. And once you see that, once you really take it in, nothing looks the same again. You look at the world and you see not just matter but mind. Not just objects but experiences. Not just a universe that contains conscious beings, but a universe that is, in some profound sense, conscious of itself. And you realize that the question is not how consciousness fits into physics. The question is how physics fits into consciousness. The question is not what makes you conscious. The question is what your consciousness makes possible. Everything you've ever experienced, every thought you've ever had, every moment of joy and sorrow and wonder and fear, all of it has been consciousness. All of it has been this fundamental feature of reality expressing itself through the particular form that is you. That's the insight. That's what Feynman was circling around. That's what his lost lecture, pieced together from fragments and conversations, and the implications of his own work, was trying to convey. Consciousness is not the mystery within physics. Consciousness is the ground from which physics arises. And you, right now, in this moment, are consciousness knowing itself. Let that sink in. Let it change how you see yourself. Let it change how you see the world. Because once you understand this, nothing is the same. The universe is not cold and indifferent. It's alive with awareness. And you are not alone in it. You are it. You are the universe, conscious of itself, wondering at its own existence, asking the deepest questions, and sometimes, if you're lucky, glimpsing the answers. That's what Feynman understood. That's what changes everything.